What do you do when someone attacks your son's service dog just because they don't like it walking across the sidewalk? What if that son is in a wheelchair? And what if the person doing the attacking is the president of your neighborhood HOA, a woman who thinks the entire street should bow to her personal rules? Now add one more thing. What if you're a federal judge and she has no clue who she's messing with? That's what happened to me. It was just a regular Tuesday afternoon. My son had just returned from his therapy session, and his guide dog, Max, was leading him safely up the sidewalk to our front gate. Max is more than just a dog. He's his lifeline. He's trained to help with doors, recognize curb heights, and guide him through obstacles. He's calm, loyal, and above all, protective. He's also certified, tagged, and fully documented. We've never had a single issue until we moved into this new HOA community. From the start, I noticed something was off. The HOA president, who I'll just call Karen for now, had this strange obsession with control. She had a clipboard in her hand more often than not. She'd walk around with sunglasses, snapping photos of people's front yards, flagging things like mailbox height and lawn edging. But what caught her attention the most was Max. The very first week, she knocked on my door and told me that dogs were not allowed to relieve themselves anywhere in the shared space, even though service dogs are protected by law. She even handed me a printed HOA policy about no pets on common sidewalks. I calmly told her that Max wasn't a pet. He was a working service animal. She scoffed and told me to keep my mud off community land. I tried to brush it off. I'm used to people who act like they know the law, but really don't. I've worked in courtrooms long enough to recognize when someone is bluffing. But it wasn't over. That day, when my son and Max were returning home, Karen was out front watering her plants. Max wasn't doing anything wrong, just walking. My son was moving slowly, carefully. Max was focused, eyes straight ahead. That's when Karen snapped. She yelled something I couldn't hear from inside the house, then came charging down the lawn, holding her hose in one hand and something metal in the other. What happened next was a blur. She tried to block the sidewalk, shouting about rules. Then she swung the metal object, what looked like a gardening rake, down at Max. He backed away, barking once to alert. My son screamed, not knowing what was happening. I heard it from inside and ran out. The sight of my son's hand shaking on the wheels, Max pressed against him for protection, and this woman standing there, panting, still gripping that metal tool. I froze. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. I walked straight to them, helped my son up, and checked Max for injuries. Karen, not realizing who I was, launched into a rant about uncontrolled animals and homeowner standards. She waved her clipboard in my face and threatened to fine me. That's when I looked her in the eye and said it calmly, just once. I'm a federal judge, and you just committed a felony assault against a registered guide dog, and you terrified a minor with a disability. You want to talk about rules? Let's talk federal law. Her face turned white. She stammered, tried to backpedal, then turned around and practically ran down the street. No apology, no explanation, just fear. I've seen that face in court before. When someone realizes they've crossed a line they never even knew existed. I brought my son inside and called the local sheriff's office. Not because I wanted to escalate things, but because there needed to be a record. This wasn't just a neighborhood tiff. This was an attack on a disabled child's protected rights. And the person responsible? The very one who thought she could control everyone else with some rules she printed in her living room. But she had no clue who she had just messed with. The next morning, it was quiet outside. Too quiet. Usually. Karen was already out by sunrise, doing her patrols, peeking into driveways, scribbling on her notepad like she was solving national crimes. But today, nothing. No footsteps. No water hose. No sarcastic remarks about my porch lights or mailbox paint. I knew she was shaken, but I also knew people like her never back down without trying something. That type of control doesn't go away overnight. My son was still nervous. He didn't want to take Max outside, not even to the sidewalk. And Max, normally steady as a rock, was sticking closer than usual, his ears twitching at every little sound. That dog had taken a hit, both physically and emotionally, and it showed. Later that afternoon, a letter showed up taped to our front door. It was official HOA letterhead. Well, as official as something printed from a homing jet can be. It claimed we were in violation of multiple rules. Unleashed animal in common space. Aggressive pet behavior. Failure to control a dangerous dog. I couldn't help but laugh. Max is a certified guide dog. He's trained to not react unless there's a direct threat. Even then, all he did was bark once and shield my son. That's his job. That's what he's trained for. There was no aggression, only protection. But Karen twisted the truth on paper and tried to flip the narrative, painting my son's lifeline as some kind of wild animal terrorizing the neighborhood. The letter threatened daily fines if we didn't remove the animal from the premises. At this point, I wasn't just upset, I was determined. She had officially stepped into illegal territory under the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act. Service animals are not considered pets. They cannot be banned, fined, or restricted in any way, so long as they are trained and necessary to assist someone with a disability. We had documentation, certification, and years of behavioral records for Max. But I didn't need to prove anything to her. I knew the law better than she ever would. Instead of replying to the letter, I drafted one of my own on actual legal letterhead, not just as a father, but as a federal judge. It was calm, concise, and filled with citations. I outlined the legal violations committed by the HOA and its president. I detailed the incident, included witness names, and referenced federal case law involving discrimination against individuals with service animals. I made sure to send a copy to Karen directly, and another to every single HOA board member. Within a day, the entire tone of the neighborhood changed. People I hadn't spoken to before started waving as I passed. Some even knocked on my door and quietly told me they had their own stories about Karen. One elderly couple whispered about how she tried to stop their visiting grandson from bringing his autism support cat. Another family said she fined them over lawn decorations twice. It became clear she'd been ruling this community with a clipboard and a fake sense of power for years. But now, someone had finally challenged her. And not just anyone, a person with authority, facts, and the full weight of federal law behind them. 2 days after my letter was delivered, I received an email from the HOA's attorney. A much different tone than Karen's printed threats. It was respectful, apologetic, and quick to state that the HOA would review the complaint thoroughly. No mention of fines. No demands. Just damage control. But I wasn't done. This wasn't just about my family anymore. It had become about every resident who had been bullied or silenced by one person pretending to be judge, jury, and executioner of a suburban street. And she had no idea that this time, she picked a fight with someone who actually understood the system, inside and out. By the end of the week, the HOA board called for an emergency meeting. That had never happened before, according to the neighbors. Karen always ran the meetings herself, usually from her porch, like it was a backyard barbecue. But this time, it was different. A printed notice was posted by the community mailboxes. Urgent HOA meeting, all residents welcome, discussing recent legal concerns. I didn't plan on attending at first. I had already said what needed to be said, in writing, backed by law, but my neighbors encouraged me. Some were worried they'd be targeted next. Others were just curious to see what would happen when the Queen of Rules got questioned for once. I decided to go, not to argue, but to listen. The meeting was held in the community center. Chairs were lined up in rows. A long folding table up front with a board member sat. Karen was there, but her usual smirk was gone. Her stack of clipboards had been replaced with a single folder she kept flipping open, like she was trying to find a way out. The room filled quickly. Almost every seat was taken. People who rarely spoke to each other were suddenly exchanging glances, whispers, and I rose as Karen cleared her throat and tried to begin the meeting. She opened with a statement about misunderstandings and how certain residents may not be familiar with HOA procedures. It was all dressed up nonsense. No apology, no acknowledgement of what really happened. Then I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I introduced myself not by title, but by name. I explained calmly what happened to my son. I explained how the dog was attacked, how the HOA president threatened us, and how she falsely accused my son's guide dog of being dangerous. Then I asked a simple question. Who here has been fined or warned for something ridiculous? Hands shot up. One man said he got fined because his Christmas lights were still up in January, even though they weren't plugged in. Another woman got written up for hanging a wind chime that apparently violated the noise rules. A young couple said they stopped using the playground because Karen told them their toddler's toys weren't HOA approved. One by one, the stories came out. Some were petty, some were absurd, but all of them painted a clear picture. This wasn't about rules. It was about power. And it was about one woman deciding she was the authority on everything, even when the law said otherwise. A board member, an older gentleman who had mostly stayed quiet until now, finally spoke. He admitted they had received multiple complaints over the years, but didn't want to cause conflict. We didn't know how far it had gone, he said. We just trusted her to handle it. That silence, that blind trust, was part of the problem. I brought a printed copy of the federal laws that protect people like my son. I handed out a few copies. I explained how service animals are protected by both state and federal law. I reminded them that discrimination, even in subtle forms, can be costly, not just morally, but legally. Karen tried to interrupt, but this time nobody let her. A woman in the back, someone I hadn't even met, spoke up and said, "I think we've had enough of being bullied." Another neighbor nodded and added, "We're tired of being afraid of our own front yards." That moment changed everything. By the end of the meeting, the board voted to temporarily suspend all enforcement activity pending a legal review. Karen looked stunned. She didn't speak. She just sat there, gripping her folder like it might save her. As the crowd dispersed, neighbors came up to me, shook my hand, thanked me, not for being a judge, but for standing up when no one else had, for not letting it slide, for turning the spotlight on a problem they'd been too tired or too scared to confront. And though Karen didn't say a word to me that night, the look in her eyes said everything. For the first time, she realized she wasn't the only one who could hold others accountable. The days that followed were filled with attention. You could almost feel in the air, like something was waiting to snap. Karen was quieter than ever, but that didn't mean she was done. People like her rarely go down without trying to drag someone else with them. And true to form, she made one final, desperate attempt to twist the situation in her favor. 3 days after community meeting, a plain white envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address, no HOA logo, just my name, typed in bold letters. Inside was a typed letter, and this time it wasn't a fine or warning. It was a demand. Karen had written it herself, but in a fake legal tone, claiming that I had slandered her publicly and damaged her reputation in the community. She said I had used my title unfairly and accused me of intimidating the board and threatening legal action without cause. I almost laughed reading it. But what caught my attention wasn't the letter. It was the last line. She threatened to file a complaint against me with the Judicial Review Board. That was her final card. Her way of saying, if I go down, I'm taking you with me. Now, let's get something straight. Judges are held to the highest ethical standards in the country. We don't get to act out in public, misuse our authority, or throw our titles around lightly. But nothing I had done, nothing, violated that standard. I never used my title to bully. I never threatened her with power. I simply stood up for my son and cited the law. But to Karen, that was enough of a threat to justify this last, bitter move. Still, I wasn't going to ignore it. I prepared a full record of everything. The HOA letters, her threats, a timeline of events, and photos of the guide dog's ID and certifications. I sent it to my own legal counsel. Not because I was afraid, but because people like Karen count on you not taking them seriously until it's too late. She didn't realize I'd been documenting everything from the very beginning. At the same time, something else began to unfold. Neighbors who once stayed silent started organizing. A few families got together and created a petition to formally remove Karen from her HOA position. They shared their stories, gathered signatures, and spread the word. What began as a quiet neighborhood revolt turned into a full-blown movement. Flyers appeared on doors. We deserve better leadership. Emails circulated. People compared fines, warnings, and scare tactics they'd endured over the past year. Some of the things I read were unbelievable, like how she fined a man for parking his work van too loud, or how she told a cancer survivor they had to remove their garden lights because they weren't in style. All of it added up to one thing. She wasn't enforcing the rules. She was inventing them. And now, the same people she once silenced were speaking up. By the end of the week, the petition had over 80 signatures, far more than enough to trigger a vote of no confidence under the HOA bylaws. A new emergency meeting was scheduled. This time, Karen wasn't the one calling it. The board had officially placed her under review and frozen all her authority. When she found out, she went door to door trying to talk residents out of signing. Some said she cried. Others said she yelled. One neighbor told me Karen even offered to waive a fine if they'd take back their name. But nobody budged, because when you hurt someone's child, especially a child in a wheelchair, there's no going back. People may have tolerated her for years, but once the truth came out, they remembered how it felt to be treated like they didn't belong in their own homes. Karen didn't just lose her grip on the rules. She lost the trust of everyone around her. And through all of this, my son, he slowly began to smile again. Max stayed right beside him every walk, head high, tail steady. No more nervous glances. No more tense shoulders. Because even though that one terrible moment could never be erased, what came after was proof that one voice, when backed by truth, can shake even the strongest walls someone tries to build. On the day of the official vote to remove Karen, the atmosphere in the community center was completely different from the first meeting. This time, people weren't whispering or avoiding eye contact. They were talking, sharing stories, nodding in agreement, standing shoulder to shoulder. What used to be a place of tension had turned into something else entirely. You could feel it, the shift, the unity. Even neighbors who had never shown up for anything before came walking in, holding signed copies of petition. Families with young kids, veterans, seniors. One man came with his oxygen tank, just to make sure his vote counted. They weren't just there because of my story. They were there because they had all been burned, pushed, and silenced for far too long. And now, they had a chance to do something about it. Karen walked in just a few minutes after the meeting was set to start. No clipboard this time. No confident posture. She looked around and saw the packed room, more people than ever before, and it hit her. This wasn't her crowd anymore. The board opened the meeting with a straightforward agenda. One item, a vote to remove Karen from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. There was no long debate, no drawn-out speeches. Everyone already knew what had happened. The facts were out in the open. The paper trail was undeniable. The behavior wasn't just inconvenient. It was dangerous and illegal. Karen was given a chance to speak. She stood up slowly and looked around the room. For a second, it seemed like she might try to apologize, maybe show some humility. But instead, she pointed fingers. She blamed overly sensitive residents. She claimed her intentions were always pure. She even accused the board of being influenced by people with hidden agendas. Nobody bought it. You could see it in the way people crossed their arms, shook their heads, looked away. The more she talked, the deeper she dug. And when she finally sat back down, not a single person clapped, not even the board members who had supported her in the past. The vote happened right after. One by one, hands went up. Yes, 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 yes. A wave of agreement swept through the room. It was overwhelming. The decision was unanimous. Karen was officially removed from her post. No title, no power, no say in the rules anymore. She stood up, gathered her things, and walked out without a word. No clipboard, no papers, just silence. Her shadow, which had hovered over the neighborhood for years, seemed to vanish with her footsteps. After she left, something amazing happened. The board opened the floor for suggestions, real ones, ideas for how to make the HOA actually work for the people, not against them. A woman suggested a community garden. A young couple proposed family-friendly events at the park. Someone even offered to volunteer for a committee that would review the rules and rewrite them to reflect respect, fairness, and, finally, common sense. And then one of the board members turned to me and asked if I'd be willing to help. Not as a judge, not as someone enforcing the law, but as a neighbor, a father, someone who had seen what happens when power is abused, and who had taken a stand against it. I agreed, because here's the thing most people forget. Service dogs don't just serve the people holding the leash. They serve the community by showing U.S. patients loyalty, calm under pressure. Max never lashed out. He never bit. He never reacted beyond what he was trained to do, protect and guide. He did his job better than any HOA president ever could. And that guide dog, by simply doing what he was trained to do, uncovered something the whole community had been too afraid to speak about. It wasn't just about my son. It wasn't just about Max. It was about every family who felt powerless. Every person who didn't think their voice mattered. But it did. It still does. The truth? All it takes is one person to say, this isn't right. One moment where someone refuses to back down. One step forward, even if you're scared, even if you're alone. Because the moment you take that step, others will follow. A few weeks after Karen was removed, the neighborhood didn't just feel different. It looked different. Kids were playing outside again, their laughter echoing through the streets. Porch lights glowed proudly in colors that once would have earned a fine. People waved at each other across driveways, exchanged recipes, and stopped to chat instead of rushing inside the moment they got home. It felt like the neighborhood was finally breathing. My son was back to taking daily walks with Max, cruising down the sidewalks in his wheelchair like he owned the road. Max walked calmly by his side, tail wagging with quiet confidence, ears alert but relaxed. And for the first time since the incident, I saw my son pet Max and laugh, really laugh. The kind that bubbles up from somewhere deep, like he was finally free again. One morning, as they passed the park, a young mother approached them with her little daughter. The girl had a stuffed dog in her hands and eyes wide with wonder. "Is that a real helper dog?" she asked, almost in a whisper. My son smiled, nodded, and said, "Yeah, his name's Max. You can pet him if you ask first." The little girl looked up shyly. "Max, may I pet you?" Max gently leaned in and gave her hand a soft sniff, then stood still as she ran her fingers through his fur. The mom looked at me and mouthed, "Thank you." It hit me in that moment. What had happened didn't just shift our family. It changed the community in ways we hadn't imagined. Karen's reign of rules had created fear, small, everyday fear, the kind that makes people second-guess decorating their yard or hosting a birthday party in their own home. She used HOA bylaws like a weapon, but once those were stripped away, people remembered what community actually meant. And slowly, the pieces began to rebuild. The HOA board invited residents to help rewrite the rulebook. I joined the volunteer committee, along with 6 others, some retired professionals, a teacher, a nurse, even a teenager who wanted to create more space for youth activities. Every voice was equal. Every idea was heard. We removed vague rules that Karen had used to her advantage. We added clear language protecting people with disabilities, their support animals, and their right to reasonable accommodations. We made it clear this neighborhood was for everyone. During one of those meetings, a board member leaned over to me and said, "I think we forgot that the HOA is supposed to serve the people, not control them." That line stuck with me. It wasn't just about changing rules. It was about shifting perspective. For years, residents had lived under a sense of silent pressure, worried that one mistake could bring a fine, a warning, or worse. But now, they were part of the process. They weren't just homeowners. They were decision makers. One afternoon, as we wrapped up a meeting, someone brought up organizing a neighborhood celebration. To start fresh, they said, a welcome back to life barbecue. The idea took off instantly. People offered to bring food, set up games, even print flyers. Someone volunteered their backyard for the space. And within days, the whole event came together. That weekend, the smell of grilled food filled the air. Kids ran through sprinklers. Music played. And for once, there were no clipboard patrols, no side eyes over non-standard patio chairs. Just people, real people, getting to know their neighbors without the pressure of rules hanging over them. Max, of course, was the star of the event. My son rolled in with Max at his side, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Not for me, not for the board, but for the dog that stayed calm through chaos, for the boy who stood his ground, and for the turning point that reminded everyone that silence helps no one, but standing up helps everyone. And Karen? Nobody really talked about her anymore. She moved out shortly after the vote, quietly. No announcements, no letters, just gone. Her house sold to a retired couple who immediately joined the new neighborhood committee and asked what they could do to help. Sometimes the absence of one person can be the reason so many others finally speak. And now, the community was moving forward, not out of fear, but with purpose, together. It wasn't long before word about what happened in our neighborhood started to spread beyond just our little corner of the state. It started with a local blog, a piece written by one of the residents who'd quietly observed everything. They detailed the story not just from the angle of the HOA drama, but from a view of a parent defending his child, a community waking up, and a guide dog becoming the quiet symbol of calm resistance. The blog post caught fire online. Soon, a regional newspaper picked it up, then a disability rights group reposted it on their socials. Before we knew it, messages from strangers started coming in, emails, handwritten letters, even phone calls. Parents of children with service dogs, veterans with PTSD who relied on their companions, teachers, legal workers, and other judges. All of them said the same thing, asterisk, thank you for speaking up. This happens more often than people think. Asterisk, one email hit me particularly hard. It came from a single mother in Texas whose daughter used a wheelchair and had a trained service cat. Her HOA tried to evict her for it, claiming the animal was non-traditional. She fought back, but she was exhausted, alone, and just about to give in. After reading our story, she said she finally felt seen, heard. She said, "You made me feel like I'm not crazy, like maybe we can fight this." And that's when it really sunk in. Karen wasn't just one bad HOA president. She was a reflection of a much bigger problem. Too many people in small positions of power think they're untouchable. They use policy and procedure to push people around, to hide behind rules they barely understand. They count on their targets staying quiet. They count on fear, on exhaustion, on people giving up. But what they don't count on is what happens when someone pushes back, and the whole community decides to stand beside them. It got to a point where advocacy groups started reaching out to host community talks. The HOA board invited a speaker from the ADA Training Council to help educate the new committee. We weren't just rewriting rules anymore. We were rewriting expectations. And what was once a stuffy, fear-filled board became a group of neighbors focused on fairness, safety, and actual support. One of the most moving moments came on a Saturday afternoon when we held a special Neighborhood Awareness Day. The board had partnered with a local service animal training organization to do a demo for kids and families. They brought in several animals, dogs, miniature horses, and even one therapy rabbit. They explained how these animals work, why they're protected by law, and what to do and what not to do when encountering them. Max sat right up front, of course, with my son proudly by his side. The trainer even pointed to Max as an example of exactly how a guide dog should behave, even under pressure. That got a little cheer from the crowd. After the event, a teenage boy who'd kept himself most of the day came over. He said his older brother was autistic and used a therapy dog at home. He used to be embarrassed about it. But now, after seeing how Max had been treated and how we all responded, he said, "I think my brother's dog is kind of a superhero." And that's what this all came down to. Not the votes, not the meetings, not the legal back and forth. It was about recognition, about seeing each other, really seeing each other, and realizing no one deserves to be pushed around just because someone thinks they can. The neighborhood is far from perfect. We still disagree sometimes about landscaping, street parking, what day the trash should go out. But now, those conversations happen out in the open, with respect, with honesty, and with a new understanding that no one voice is too small and no person is too different to belong. And Max, he's still here, still doing his job, still guiding, still protecting, still proving every single day that quiet strength can change everything. It was early evening when I found myself sitting on the front porch, watching my son and Max make their way down the block. The golden light of sunset stretched across the street, turning the sidewalk soft and warm. Max walked slowly, step for step, like he always did, alert, calm, dependable. But something was different that day. My son waved to almost every neighbor they passed. Some waved back. Others stopped to chat. One older woman even leaned over her fence and handed him a fresh-baked cookie. No fine, no complaints, just kindness. It was simple, quiet, and yet something I hadn't seen in years. This neighborhood had come alive again. A few houses down, I could see Mr. and Mrs. King planting flowers in their front yard. 2 teenagers rode bikes across the cul-de-sac, laughing about something I couldn't quite hear. In another yard, a group of dads set up folding chairs and lit a grill. The smell of charcoal and spice carried on the breeze. It smelled like home. And then, a small detail caught my attention. A blue and white sign freshly staked in a neighbor's lawn. It read, "This community welcomes everyone. Ada respected here." That sign wasn't official. It wasn't required. No one was enforcing it. But it was there, on someone's own terms, on their own soil. It meant everything. Later that night, as we sat down for dinner, my son looked up at me and said, "Dad, remember when Max got attacked?" I paused, unsure where he was going with it. He continued, "I used to feel scared after that, like maybe I didn't belong outside. But now I think maybe that had to happen for things to get better." It stopped me in my tracks. Kids see things clearly in ways we sometimes forget as adults. To him, it wasn't about punishment. It wasn't even about Karen. It was about the after, about how things changed, how people stood up, how strangers became allies, and how his world, once shaken, became stronger because of what came next. After dinner, I checked my email like usual. Sitting at the top of my inbox was a message from someone with a government domain. They'd read about the case and wanted to explore a proposal, one that involved using our story as part of a federal training program on disability rights enforcement. I didn't reply right away. I just sat there for a while, letting it sink in. The story that started with one woman's cruelty might now be used to educate the people who write the laws. I thought about the irony of that. Karen had tried to silence my son's existence, tried to frame it as a disruption to the rules. And now, that very moment was becoming the catalyst for real, structured national awareness. It was humbling, but more than that, it was grounding. Because in the end, this was never about headlines or attention or revenge. It was always about something quieter, something stronger, the kind of justice that doesn't come in a gavel or a courtroom, the kind that lives in sidewalks that are safe again, porches that feel welcoming again, and children who laugh without hesitation. It reminded me of what I swore to uphold when I became a judge: fairness, but not the kind printed in thick books or hidden behind formal titles. The kind that lives in day-to-day life, in neighborhoods, in moments when someone speaks up not because it's their job, but because it's the right thing to do. And while Karen's name had disappeared from all HOA paperwork, her actions left behind a kind of reverse legacy, a list of things not to repeat, a cautionary tale of what happens when someone mistakes authority for power. She never apologized. She never admitted wrong. She vanished quietly. But even in her absence, she had taught this community a valuable lesson. Respect doesn't come from titles. It comes from how you treat people when you think no one's watching. The next morning, I saw a group of kids gathered around my son again, pointing at Max, asking questions, smiling. He answered each one, proud, calm, confident. And Max? He just sat there like always, watchful, steady, quietly heroic. It was a new day, but the same dog, the same sun, the same sidewalk. Only now, the neighborhood had finally caught up to them.